so I gotta get this part right and make those choices right, because, you know, it affects everything down the road.
But you're essentially sketching.
Yeah. And I draw a lot and doodle. And I had an experience very early on when I was at my studio in Connecticut. So this was late 70s. And I shared a studio with my sister-in-law. And we had an old battery garage. We rented it. And the garage was about 2,000 square feet. Kind of about the size of this room, maybe a little bigger. We had a counter in one corner, and I had one side, and she had one side. And one day we go to lunch, and I'm doodling on napkins. And she goes, "What are you doing?" "What are you drawing?" I said, "I'm drawing my pots." You know, you always draw you're making pictures, you just doodle. And she looks at it and she goes, "No, you're not." Okay, now that could be a moment where you just say, "Screw up." Or it could be a moment where you say, "What do you mean I'm not drawing my pots?" And we went down that road, and she goes, "The way you're dealing with line here is really different than your work. This is much more fluid. This is really moving. What you're making in the studio is very, very tight. A tight sense of line, not a line that is moving, one that's constrained." And it just sat with me for a long time. And I started to see what she was talking about, and my work completely shifted. Because my ideas were there on the napkin. Pardon?
Yeah. Epiphany with your sister-in-law. Did that have anything to do about the rules that you're talking about?
No, it has to do with. This is a classic human condition. You see yourself in the world one way, and if you're lucky, and if everything's right, the people around you see yourself the same way. There's, you know, you're in a real, it's real, okay? Nothing's hidden, okay? Where there's a problem is if you think you're experiencing the world in one way and everybody else thinks it's different. And that happens a lot, okay? And so it's the same thing in your work. It's like you see it going one direction. This is when you have critique. It's you see this one direction you're moving in, and you can have this whole fantasy world about it, which supports what you're doing. We all do it. We have to do it. But sometimes it's not matched. Somebody else sees it and says, "Well, actually, what you're doing isn't what you think you're doing. You're doing something else." And it's in that interface of that conversation is where magic happens. That's the place where you can really go deep. Because that is all about you at that point. It's not about looking out on the world. It's about you really understanding what you're doing. Being self-critical, it's all this stuff. And I was really lucky that she gave that to me. Because and again, this is a little lunch that happened in 1979, and to this day, how many years later, I still think about it. You know.
Are those handmade coils or extruded coils?
Handmade. I don't like extruded coils.
How thick is your piece right now, and the thickness of the coil? What's the
thickness of the coil?
Is it about an inch?
Yeah, about. And the thickness of this piece, it's only about that thick
Ah,
here, but it's that thick down here. So it starts very thick and moves up. And that again that's architecture for what's to come above. So it holds that weight. Okay, so if I was teaching a class and I said to everybody, okay, we're going to make some coil pots. I want everybody to make some coils, and then I want you to make a form, make some coil pots. And probably 95% of you would
Moan.
moan. I was one of those ones. I was. You'd start at one end and you'd go all the way around. And you'd make a complete circle and you'd keep going and you'd keep going. And when my work started to get asymmetrical, so which means that if I had a center point, what's happening on this side is not equidistant than what's happening on this side to the center. I found that putting a coil around isn't the solution. So I build pots the way like an 18th century seamstress might build a big gown. Okay, I spent a lot of time at the MFA in Boston looking at an old garment, old costume, if you will. And everything's made out of small pieces of cloth. And so it was like, oh, there's something to think about. So anyway, so my coils are all small. So a 4-foot piece is made out of pieces this big. And just little moves. And I use a technique which is basically if this is the clay wall and I lay the coil on the clay wall like that, I'll push it down on the inside, like that, and push it down on the outside, so it's connected. Okay. Then I'll scrape down, and then I'll pinch up. Okay. And then I'll scrape and thin that wall out. And so this is kind of like a, in terms of the physics of it, or the compression of it, this is like a hammer and anvil method of building, which is what the history of ceramics is about. Okay, so you take a coil, you put it on, you have a hard form on the inside, so it might be a stone, a piece of wood, whatever, and then you have a mallet on the outside, and you hit it, and the clay compresses, and because clay is plastic, the compression forces the clay to move, and the only place it can move is up. Okay, so all those fantastic old, Nigeria, Ethiopia, all the African work, Spanish folk pots, Italian folk pots, all these stuff are made like that. So I just basically do the same thing, but just with small things.
Well, you scored, but you did not slip. Yeah.
Never slip. A rule.
Well, why did you score even then?
I only score because this was made earlier than this.
Okay.
So like if I add a coil to this, I won't score. Okay. And slip is actually, water's not your friend when it comes to coiling. So when you add water and do that, it actually acts as a separator, if you will. And gives you a better chance of cracking than if you don't do it. Now sometimes if that gets too stiff, what I'd do is I'd spritz a little water on there and then score the hell out of it and let it get into a slurry where it would just soften that edge, it wouldn't be liquid. And then I'd build on that.
And what is that clay that you're using there?
What is this?
The Peter Vokus mix.
Your glasses are.
Yeah. used to wear, readers and everything. And they'd fall off on throwing. You lose them and you do all this stuff. And these are just units.
So just to give you a survey of time, the lunch will be here a little before noon, so we can keep going. Right now,
Where are we at?
it's at 11:25.
Okay, so whenever you're working, you're leaving memory of the process that you're working in. Okay? And that memory is information on how somebody's to experience the piece. So if your work is about kind of catching moments in time of mark making, say you're firing a wood gun and you want the sense of process to be part of the conversation of the work to the viewer, then you might throw very relaxed and let the throwing rings be part of it. Let the scraping be part of it. You might, however you touch it, you might let that kind of reveal itself. In my work, I try to remove all aspect of making. So I want the work to feel I want it to feel like that. Okay? Or like that. Or like that. It's like I'm not interested in having anybody understand how the piece is made. It's not the conversation of the work. Because what I'm trying to do is create analogies. Okay, so that they trigger kind of feeling, emotion, connection through memory. Okay, so how do you get somebody to put their hand on a pot? One way to do is put a handle on it. Okay, but you can lay out 50 pots, go around the studio and just lay them out, and walk around. Which one really wants you to put your hand on it? Well, it's a combination. It's all kinds of. It's an abstraction. Okay, and that abstraction it touches you because of your own history, your own sense of your being in the world. It may trigger a memory. It may be a color thing. It may be and this is like, it's so quiet back in the back, you don't even think about it. But something makes you do that. Okay, so I'm trying to get people to do that. And so
how do you get rid of the throwing rings at the bottom? Because when I do this construction method, I end up with throwing rings that show up in the firing and then smooth on the top.
Well, part of it is when I started talking at the very beginning, I said, one of the things I like about play is you have to reverse engineer. So you have this image of what you want, and you got to go back to the very beginning to take out that throwing ring from the very beginning. You can't have it there and then try to hide it. So that might mean that on your first pull, your hand is like that instead of like that. It could be as simple as that. But if you don't connect to that, you'll never do this. You'll only do that, because that's your memory of throwing. So you change your hand skill, your hand position, to meet a need that happens 20 steps down the line. So if you don't change that right away, the first step, you'll never get there. So you kind of have to reverse engineer what the process is. So throwing lines come from too much pressure in the pull. It may have to do with the speed of the wheel. It may have to be, how your fingers touch the plate, pushing too hard. And as you move up the pot, the pot goes thick and thin. Okay? So you need to get those out early, and the way you get them out is don't do it. But you have to be, it sounds so simple, but it's actually really difficult. Because this is that thing about self-reflection. And it's like, what am I doing wrong? And and you know what you're doing. You can break down the process. And all you have to do is throw one pot and just think about it very consciously. Be in the moment and think about it. And you'll figure out where that moment is. Because you know it's like down the road, it comes out of the kiln and you see that memory in the pot. And you don't want it there. So throw another pot and really consciously try to find where's that moment where you see the first ring. And then don't do that. And all it is like instead of this, it's like that. It's a pressure point. So that is a very concentrated pressure. You know, you hit somebody with that can hurt. It's very different from that. That the pressure is dissipated. This is like focus. And so you're doing that. All the energy is focused in this one little point. Spread that out over your whole finger pads, and now it's focused on 2 inches or 1.5 inches, something like that. And it's really dissipated, so you don't get that.
I've heard that if you get rid of your throwing rings on the outside, but they're still on the inside, that they can show through it after fire
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And again, all ribs doing is spreading out that pressure point. Or, you know, it's like now you have this much surface to hit the clay wall rather than that.
But Chris, besides your glue, what's the favorite tool you have that you never leave home without?
Well, I use that a lot. And it's actually, it's interesting because when I was telling you I was at Notre Dame, when I did that, I left that at home. And, you know, they don't have anything like that. They got forks and they got, you know, it's a mess. So they, when you're working, one of the things to think about is like, how does time affect your work? Okay, so I used to give projects to students, and I'd say, okay, make a group of pieces, and you know, let's say it's Monday, and I'll say, okay, in 2 weeks we're going to have a credit, and they'll make some stuff, and in 2 weeks we show up and we look at the work. And then I pick a couple pieces, and I'd say, okay, now make this piece in half the time you did it, and make this piece in double the time you did it, and we'll have it next week. And so how you focus attention on something kind of affects outcome. And this could be throwing, hand building, sculpture, pot, doesn't matter what it is. So we tend to be in a rhythm based on all this outside stuff that affects us. So you all have lives, you all have families, you have all this stuff. You're here for a certain period of time. You make a body of work so you can finish by the time you go home, and then you come in to trim it, and you do this stuff, but it's all orchestrated by kind of how you have access to the studio, your family life, all these things, right? So the outcome of that work is all dependent on all of those decisions. Yeah, I did a workshop down in Jamaica, and I had this woman who was from Chicago, and she was really questioning her work and how to challenge it and everything. And I said, okay, talk to me about your cycle of making. And she was a big-time psychiatrist in Chicago. And she goes, well, I work Monday through Friday. My weekends are my own. And so I'll sit down and make stuff on Saturday, and then I'll finish it on Sunday. Okay, so I said, okay, well, just don't do that. She goes, what do you mean? I said, make stuff Saturday and Sunday, and finish it the following Saturday and Sunday. And it was like, it was like, what? I never thought of that. And 6 months later, I get a letter from her, and it was like, you absolutely changed how I think about my life. And all that changed was that her work cycle shifted. She was able to invest more in kind of one type of thinking. Her body of time that she had to think about the making expanded greatly. And then the body of time she had to think about the finishing expanded greatly. Because she gave more time to both. Okay, so to me, this is one of the key elements of how we make what we make. So I think about this stuff all the time. It's how do you change the time? How do you respond to time in your work? So when I'm building, it's like, this is like really slow time. This is like watching paint dry. Okay. But what's happening is that the potential of where this piece moves, let's say if I was going to take 3 days to finish it, is 10,000-fold. It can move in so many different directions. And in any one moment it has the potential to do this way or that way. And I make a decision now, and then I go up another coil, and it becomes a whole other pot. I see a whole other possibility. And what that does is that keeps me in the game, absolutely in the moment. There's no downtime. I don't listen to music, don't listen to podcasts, don't listen to the radio, don't listen to books on tape. It's like right there. Because if you don't, in my work, I have to be there. Now, if I'm rolling coils, I can have all kinds of stuff on. Or even when I'm making T-bowls, I can, because T-bowls are interesting for me. They're almost like a meditation that I need to remove myself for the ones to really happen. It's like it's just muscle memory at some point. And the first ones I make are like always the bad ones. And it's only when you're in the rhythm and you're just doing it, if you're making like 30 of them or 40 of them at a time and touching them, fiddling, that your mind goes away and all this great stuff happens.
So how much of your work, of like the sculptural work, which this appears to be,
Yeah.
is it premeditated and planned, or is it spontaneous, just whatever feels right?
Well,
Big idea of where
it's kind of like, okay, here's another thing to think about. Remember when you were kids and you get together with your friends and you just kind of invent, right? Okay, so I lived in a neighborhood where there were like 20 kids, and at 8 in the morning we'd be out, and at 8 at night we'd be back. And, you know, it was like, you know, the good old days, right? Where you just, I'd be 10 miles away on a bike, you know, no one. But what I'm getting at is that you get 10, 20 kids together and they want to do something. So they all have to come to some type of agreement on what to do. And it's kind of magic how that happens. So let's invent a game. Okay, what do you want? Okay, let's do this and this. No, you know, but somewhere or another you come to consensus. And you can play for hours this game that you all invented. No rules. You make up the rules. And they tweak as you play. But you're in that moment all the time. Okay? And to me, that's what this is about. This is about kind of giving the boundary and then letting the play develop. So doing the doodles is giving the boundary. It's like saying, okay, we're going to play football. not going to play baseball. They both require balls. They both require a field, a boundary, out of bounds and in bounds, all that. They require two teams. So there's a lot of stuff that's the same, but it's completely different. Okay, so when I doodle, I'll draw like 200, 300 drawings. And I will just kind of put them up and look at them, and somewhere in there will tell me if I'm playing football or baseball for the next series of work. And then, so now I already know where I am. And now it's just, okay, what's the out of balance point? Now let's figure out kind of the minutia of the rules, and I figure those out in each case. So it's trying to give a boundary to something, and then really push against it.
Does that mean you don't throw fire or manipulate that point just gives you the opportunity?
Just give me an opportunity to really move out. And then I used to have students who, and I hear this a lot, it's like with young people, when I work with 18, 19, 20-year-olds, undergraduates, even graduate students who are younger, one of the things that you're always hitting against is this concept of boundary. And they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear that a wall is actually freedom. Okay. It's like, figure out where the wall is, and then invent within. And you can go forever. But it's like, if you don't have that boundary, if you don't have that edge, then there's no place to go. It's like there's nothing to push against. There's nothing to say you went overboard. You didn't go far enough. There's nothing to hold you in.
Tennis needs a
Yeah.
net.
Pardon?
Tennis needs a net. Tennis needs a net.
Tennis needs a net. Yeah. So just think about that. And like, what are the boundaries in your work? What ones do you set up? Do you set up a different one? And what are the boundaries that you take for granted all the time? It's like, I'll talk about this in my slideshow, but if you put out a whole body of your work, and you say, what am I doing the same in everything? Well, I did this a couple of years ago, because I was like hitting an edge. I was like, I'm just repeating myself. I just know this stuff so deep. It's like, this is becoming a kind of a parody. So it's like, when you understand what you're doing, that's when a red flag goes off for me. Because then I'm not in a place of kind of discovery. I'm in a place of understanding, and it's much more interesting to be in a place of discovery. So I put out all, I was looking at all my work and everything, and it was what's consistent. Well, everything starts with a circle. So okay, well, let's start everything with an oval. And it was absolutely a radical shift. And it was just that one little simple formal change. Take the circle and make it an oval. And all of a sudden now, how you deal with front and back and side is different. It's a different question. The solution has to be completely different. And so consequently, you're now, or I was now in a place of trying to figure out, again, where to take the work. So it brings you right back into engaging in the moment. Which is where, your work, if you're lucky, becomes a place where, like, to get someplace. It becomes a place to go deeper into kind of your understanding of the world, how you formulate ideas, how you can resolve things. It's a great. It's kind of like if you write. I did a workshop in Jamaica with a woman, Pam Houston, who was a writer, and we did the workshop on form. So she did a writer's workshop, I did a play workshop. And the writers did all different types of form in narrative. So, you know, in terms of writing and structure, it's how do you tell a narrative? And you can give rules to that. One rule she gave is every word has to begin with the next letter in the alphabet. So you start with A, and you write a narrative that ends with the E. 26 words, and every word has to change. Try to do that. Okay, so that's a boundary. So push against that. Can you go to a place you'd never get to if you didn't have that boundary? Okay, so she gave all these different narrative boundaries for the writers. And then with ceramics, I gave all these form boundaries that had to do with formal elements. Okay, make a piece that deals with you take one element of proportion, one element of diameter, if you will, and then add to it. So you start with 1, and you get 2, and you get 4, and you get 8. Right? So make a picture that deals with 1, 2, 4, 8 in terms of proportion. So that's a problem. So how do you deal with the diameter of the foot, the swell of the hip, the diameter of that hip moving into the neck, how the handle moves? So you have a formal element that you're pushing against to solve a problem. And out of that comes absolute invention. And you're still making a picture. But now you're making a picture with a boundary that is arbitrary, which, you know, an arbitrary boundary is fantastic permission to screw up. I mean, it really is. It's like, it's wonderful. It's total freedom. So my class dealt with, he gave all different types of formal boundaries. She gave all types of narrative boundaries. And we'd get to every day, two groups would get together and talk about it. Fascinating class. You know, I walked away learning so much. But this is what I do in my work. I like set up these strategies and then try and make work on those strategies. And that keeps me in it. So a strategy can simply be an enclosed form versus a necked form. Horizontal versus vertical. You know, it could be real simple.
So what is your boundary on this piece?
Well, it's like, what, 4 more hours?
I was getting ready to say that. Speaking of formal, 15 minutes before we break for lunch.
Chris, do you leave? When do you take the? You're not on a plaster back, so when do you take the form off the back? Release it from the back.
It's more like Mon Gregory would do it.
Yep.
Because it can't stay on forever.
No, it can't stay on. But right now I'm sticking to it, and I want it to because as I get taller, I'm going to be moving it around. I don't want it to do that kind of thing. But at some point, I'd clean the foot, and then I would cut it.
Okay.
We'll discuss those formal boundaries in 4 hours.
Okay, thank you. Because that's what I'm. But if it was a plaster bat, you wouldn't have to cut it.
No, and that's why I use plaster. I just leave it
You
as
just leave
possible.
it on and let it happen.
Do you want to talk about how you got to making ceramic art or clay? How did that just sort of, was that an organic thing, or were you introduced to somebody who you admired or something like that?
I was very fortunate. You guys live in the Bay Area, right? And do you know Hughes Ceramics?
Yes.
Okay. Well, my father was in the giftware business. So post World War II, he comes back from the war. His father had a company. It's called Gustin Company. And they did giftware. And they sold to Walnut and Macy's and gift shops and everything. And they had like a dozen different lines. Some of the lines were ceramic. And my dad met Edith Heath at Gumps in 1947 and loved her work and said, we want to rep you, and that started his ceramics. And he funneled a pile of money into the company and got Edith and Brian going. And repped them until the mid-80s, I guess. Brian died probably in the 80s sometime. Edith died kind of late 90s. And, so we'd take family trips up to visit Brian and Edith at the factory and stay at their houseboat and everything. And when I was a teenager, my dad had he was part owner of 3 different ceramic factories in LA. So I grew up in ceramic factories.
Yeah, you like that? We like to serenade all of our visiting artists.
And so my first jobs were sweeping floors and cleaning toilets in the factories. And I'd go after school, and the shifts would end at 3, and I'd go after school and then work till 6 and clean the whole. It's 2 city blocks. And they were making Heath tile. So Heath tile was made in LA. And the Norton Simon Museum, LA County Museum, and all those, and all that was made in LA. And so when I was 17, I was interested in kind of the studio end of ceramics and took a throwing class in Venice Beach. I grew up in LA, so a throwing class in Venice Beach. Yeah, it's a place called the Pot Shop. And I walk into this place.
Whole word that you're getting the 70s.
And it was on Venice Boulevard. And it was on Rose and something else. And I walked into the place to check it out, and there's some guy throwing a cylinder. And the cylinder is about that. In my memory, it's like that, but it was probably like that. And I was watching him, and you all know what it's like when you first see somebody throw. It's like just massive. And I asked him how long it took him to learn to do that, and he said a year. And I always think about this, it's like, what would have happened if he said 10 years? But he said a year, and it was like, I can do that. I can do that. I can commit to that. And so I signed up for a class and took classes and got into it. And then when I graduated high school, I went to UC Irvine for a year. And, so this is like 1970. And then back then you could graduate high school in January. It wasn't all June. And so and they were on the quarter system, so I was off schedule. So I took a class, or I took kind of a year, and then I wanted to get on the same schedule, so I took a semester off, quarter off, and I went to Europe and traveled around. And I came back, and I had some time to kill before school started. So I went and worked in one of the factories in Pasadena, a factory called Walnut Ceramics. And there were 25 people in the factory. It was almost entirely Hispanic. And I was like the owner's son. Right? So they put me with a head guy, and an old guy named Tom Flynn, who was one of these characters from, he grew up he worked at Gladdy McBean, and kind of a big California, companies, right? And he looked exactly like Popeye. and so what he did is he put me, they were teaching me the business. But I didn't really get this at the moment. But what they did is they put me in every part of the company to learn. So I spent, weeks in the clay area, in the glaze area. I spent weeks in mold making as well as slip casting. And I went and worked with all the women who were doing the finishing work. And I loaded kilns. So we went from kind of liquid clay all the way through the making process, glazing, firing kilns, to shipping. I had to work with the shippers, and they just adopted me. They just brought me in. It was fantastic. Never forget it. And the guy came to work one day and said he just got diagnosed with some horrific cancer and was dead in 2 months. And they didn't have anybody to take over the company, to run it, except me. So I ran the factory for 2 years. And so I dropped out of school and just ran the factory.
So what were you making? Was that tile as well, or?
No, this was all giftware. I have a couple of pictures of mine.
What's the name of the place?
That was Wildwood Ceramics. If you Google it, a bunch of images.
So was that earthenware?
Yeah, it was all white earthenware.
Now, is what you're doing being really careful about the curve in every part of that pot? Because I'm seeing a lot of parabolas.
Yeah. You're paying attention. Yeah, I'll do a big talk on curves after lunch. Okay, I'll have to do some drawings. But I'm looking a lot. I'm looking at silhouette and ads all the time. Every time I bend over, that's what I'm looking at. But I'll tell you what I'm looking for after lunch because it's a little discussion. So anyway, so I was there for 2 years, and then my brother kind of convinced me that if I stayed there, I'd like die in LA. And that I should go to art school. And he was going to Kansas City Art Institute studying painting, and he had taken classes with Ferguson, and his wife at the time was in the clay department. And so they convinced me to go there, and that's how I ended up. So it's all just damn luck. Well, it's interesting when you. Like I grew up in LA, so there's no, there weren't really seasons. Yeah. And then I went to school in Kansas City, and then I went to upstate New York for graduate school. And as I was moving east, all the stuff that, you have to, history is an interesting thing. And contemporary American ceramic history is really interesting. And so back in the 70s, when I was going to school, there were no ceramic galleries. Okay. You had Bronstein and Keith here. You had the Yaw Gallery in Detroit. They're just like a handful in the country. And they were showing, Volcas and Arneson. The whole West Coast was all funk at that time. If you were making pots, it was all craft fair. There was no pots being shown anywhere in the country. In New York, there was nothing. It was Phelps Creek, Art Creek, 57th Street. So what I was interested in was pots, and the type of pots that I was interested in were pots that were not necessarily, they were functional, but they were dealing with they weren't strictly functional. And all that is happening on the East Coast, so I ended up on the East Coast. It made sense. That's why I moved.
How'd you end up in Massachusetts?
I went to New Haven because my brother was at Yale and set up a studio with his wife. And then after 3 years, got asked to teach at BU. This is back in the day when somebody could call you.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen anymore. But, and when they asked me to come up for an interview, they did a failed search. And they weren't happy with anything, and they liked my work, and they called me and asked if I'd come up and interview. And my answer was, well, if you buy me lunch and pay for my gas. Because I had no interest in university teaching. And then I went up there and decided I'd do it. 1980 to 85.
So Chris, about 10 minutes, we'll take a break and we'll have a short little half an hour lunch reprieve.
Okay. What time are we going to do the slides?
We can do the slides at about 1:45. 1:45. Does that sound good? Right now it's 12, so in about 10 minutes we'll take a break and then half an hour to eat, and then we can get started around 1:45 or 1:20. Do I have my math right? Sound good? I'm hungry. Yeah, so and then that will leave you 1:45 up until 4, or however you want to stretch it beyond that. We can go until 9 o'clock at night if you want. It's up to you.
That's great.
Okay. So whenever we break for lunch, everyone just make sure Chris has a chance to wash up and go first in line, and then I will follow. No, I'm just kidding. Then you all can go, and then I'll follow you all.
Well, I was.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
When I was in New Haven, I was like really lucky. When I was at Alfred, I got interested in the stock market, and it's really funny. And you know, I like sold some pots at a craft fair, and I had $1,000. So I said, okay, well, let me check out some stocks. And I bought into this company called Savin Business Machine, which was literally right before they came out with dot matrix printing. Now, up until that time, it was a typewriter. Okay. And the stock just went through the roof.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when I got out of Alfred, I sold the stock and bought brick for kilns, and that's how I started my studio.
So what years?
Pardon?
When was that?
That was 77. And then I started applying to craft fairs and everything, and it just got rejected from everything. I just really, it was like, it was one of these things where you realize that everything they've told you is a lie. It's actually kind of an amazing moment, because you have the ship you're on, you realize isn't going anywhere, and you have to kind of build your own boat. And you either do it or you go into something else. And that's what happened. I mean, it was really that clear. And so my whole shift happened in my work, and as soon as that happened, I had a show in New York City, and then Harry Rodriguez picked me up in Garth Park and all this stuff. But all that happened because of that wall I hit. And if that wall wasn't there, I would have gone down there, and none of that. You know. Well, I would have just, I wouldn't have confronted my work in a way that I did. I wouldn't, you know, I would have gone the route that had the least resistance, I guess. This is the Volcus.
Yeah.
You taught at Alfred, is that right?
Pardon?
You taught at Alfred?
No, I went to Alfred.
You went to
I taught summer school thing there once, but I went there.
Did they have like a reading list, or could you recommend like some just like essential reading? Like, what do you think about Rawson? Should people read Rawson?
Rawson, in my book, is a genius. I mean, he really gets it. Philip Rawson wrote a book called Ceramics. And Rawson was this interesting guy. He also wrote a book called Drawing and Painting and Sculpture. Okay, and he was an academic, and he would dissect the history of the medium, and really break it into kind of why certain things developed and where the big moments were, and how it shifted the way people saw things, and you know, like when did perspective come in and why? You know, how did, you know, and all these things. You know, how color is used throughout, you know, the power of color and all this stuff. And so he'd do it for all these books, these mediums. And he wrote one on ceramics, which was just transformative. It was a book that came out at the right time. Okay, and I was talking about American ceramic history. Is like, you know, California has its own history. Post World War II, you got armies and crowd, you got that whole thing happening here. But the rest of the country, that wasn't going on. You know? And you had the school systems, and you had a breakdown where sculptors and painters, and you know, like Ken Price, you know, making his stuff in the early '60s, moving up, and he never thought of himself as a potter. You know, he was an artist. There's no boundary there. There's no break there. You know? And that could only have happened here. You know, because what was going on in this area in that time. That wasn't happening on the East Coast. And there wasn't the academic support for it to happen. Okay. And so Rawson writes his book in the late 70s, mid-70s, and it was right at this moment where ceramics started to shift. And it got a lot of people moving. And it broke down clay in a way that was really quite amazing. And how can color be used as metaphor? You know, and kind of how can analogy be found in form? And what's the social consequence of that? How does it feed the social mythology, spiritual mythology? You know? Really interesting stuff. Yeah, you know, when I was in school, Ferguson never talked about it. You know, it was like make a casserole, you know. Make it so that, you know, the sauce when you it doesn't spill into the ring for the lid. So Rawson. But it's the type of book, you know, that you basically put in the bathroom and you read like a couple of paragraphs. Yeah, it's pretty damn dense, and you have to read it over and over and over, and he gives all these examples, and then you got to go look for them. Now it'd be really cool to read it because he mentioned something in it, and you can just go to Google Images and pull up something, and you can see it all there. Back then, you'd have to make a trip to the library. But he's the one that had a tremendous effect on me.
Since we're talking about books, you mentioned earlier on you were talking about books. The medieval
Byzantine.
Architecture. Does something, book of that come to mind to you? That's like
No, I mean, when I looked at this stuff, I was looking at it like, you know, searching out how, from a real engineering point of view, how stress is really upheld in the roof. Okay, and so, you know, how are buttresses used in cathedral architecture and why? Why do the buildings look the way they do? Okay. There's a real reason. I mean, it's like they look that way because they wouldn't stand up if they did.
A place to start, Gary, would be Hagia Sophia. Hagia Sophia is the big mosque that was built by the Byzantines. And it wasn't built as a mosque, it was built as a church in 573.
Yeah.
That would be the place to start. And Simeon is the name of the the Muslim architects have built a lot more mosques in Istanbul.
Gary, you should refer to our Clay Arts Guild library after the workshop, and she can give you all of the key references for that information.
But that's,
Well,
that's the key reference for Byzantine art.
Yeah, and you look at
may not be able
Moorish
to hear you.
architecture. I mean, it's unbelievable because I'm really interested in geometry. I'll talk about this in my lecture, but how do you morph a square into a circle? Take a bunch of brick, okay? Lay them out in a square, and now turn it into a circle. It's a problem in geometry. Where are the transitions? How do you make that move? Islamic architecture is just, full of this. It's unbelievable, the invention. And it's all these geometric forms just pushed into each other. So I think about all that stuff. I look at that. That's the stuff that informs me. What doesn't inform me is like I don't look at a lot of contemporary work. I mean, I look at it, but I don't look at it from my work. I look at historical work from my work. Historical thoughts. Because it's all been done. It's all figured out. There's lots of... how is line used to describe volume? Take that as a concept, and now look through images and really try to focus on that. How does a move of brush over a surface express volume at the top? How do you contain the volume, or how do you expand the volume? You just follow that question, you could get all kinds of information to help you with your work. So it's not like, I like that, so I'm going to make that. It's not about that. It's about how does that volume express itself. What's happening in the form to make that volume feel like it's inhaling air rather than exhaling air. That's conceptual. It's not doing it. It's implying it. So how is it implying it? How do diameters work to make that happen? How does the pull off the table, that rise off the table, how that is expressed, and then how is it held? How's that energy held, and then how's it released? That is, when you can kind of get in there, you can make it work this. You can really begin to understand how to make that curve, how to make that.
Yep.
That was perfect.
They agree. So speaking of inhaling, I think maybe...
Everybody's getting hungry.
I'm good. I fasted for 3 days once, so I'm good. But we can take a break now if you want, and we can rise up now with the chorus and the music. And there's our dance studio, so they're performing, they're practicing.